It's 34 minutes after 7. Welcome to my banner. And today we're talking about this issue. Take the feature that we bought in my community. The full version is on my community, but we here on the AM show get to play about 10 minutes of that. Take a look at the story of that malnourished child. And you know there are millions of children around the world who are suffering from this. And listen to this. The lives and futures of millions of children are in jeopardy. We have a choice: invest in the most excluded children now, or risk a more divided and unfair world. So we want to talk about this report that UNICEF has launched, and my guest is Miss Suzanne Namondo Ngongi, and she's a representative of UNICEF right here in Ghana. She's not new to the show. It's a pleasure to have her again talk about this report that's been launched, but I think that most importantly, what should we do and how should we do what we have to do? I want to say good morning to you. Thanks for your time.
Good morning.
So who are these secluded children?
Most of them are the children living in poor households. Most of them are the children who, because their parents' circumstances, the state they don't manage to get access to services. And the problem is, in our interventions, what we've found, we made a lot of progress with the Millennium Development Goals. We know that things have happened. But what we have found is that we did not manage to reach these excluded children, these children living in poor households, these children who, for whatever reason, are a little bit more vulnerable. Some of them have disabilities, some of them are suffering from HIV/AIDS, but the vast majority of them are the ones that are living in the poorest households.
Okay. So you've given us a certain timeline. Let's talk about Ghana. What should we do?
Well, all our presidents, the heads of states, got together not too long ago in 2015 and decided on new goals for us, right? The Millennium Development Goals came at term in 2015, and now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. As mentioned earlier, we have made progress, but clearly there's still a huge unfinished agenda. And all our heads of states committed that they will make progress in all of these areas that we need to make progress in. We now have 17 goals, and a lot of it is more of the same actually. We're saying that we will eradicate poverty. Before we said we'll reduce it by half. Now we'll say we've learned some lessons, we know what we need to do, we can actually eradicate poverty. We're committing that we will leave no child behind. We're committing that all children will be well nourished, etc. So we have these commitments now. They're still new. And you know, with this whole international global goal setting, everybody gets together, all the governments get together, they agree on some goals. Then all the technical people like us and their civil service get together and try and figure out, okay, so what do the plans need to look like for us to reach those goals? So Ghana is in that process now, just as many other countries are in that process now, of seeing what they need to do to get to those goals.
Yeah, but you know, when our leaders are committed to something, we are not particularly hopeful because being committed is quite different from what they do on the ground. But
you know, leaders don't exist in isolation. There's the entire population that exists with leaders. And you know, in much of life, you know, you need a critical mass of people to actually affect change. So yes, the leaders commit, but it takes everybody else plus the leader to get us to where we're trying to get to.
Is this a problem that we as ordinary people can also solve?
I think it's a problem that, you know, as ordinary people, we just need to know a lot more about it, about our own country, about what's happening in the world. There's so much that we don't know. For instance, in Ghana, when you say things like 1 in 4 people still live in poverty. Sometimes people are a little bit shocked. They don't quite understand what does 1 in 4 mean. How do you define poverty? You know, things like that. These are the sorts of things that we need to know.
Because, you know, you tend to look at your immediate environment and you start counting 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Who is poor?
And the question is, how do you define poverty? Because when we say 1 in 4 are poor, if I mention what that means, many people will realize that actually a lot more are poor, so to speak. because poverty is defined by the international poverty rate, which is about $2 per person per day. $2 is 8 CDs. Subsiding on 8 CDs a day, how many people can do that? That's small. That's small. So we're saying 1 in 4 are poor. So 1 in 4 are subsiding on 8 CDs a day. But many more are subsiding on 10 CDs a day. They are not counted in that 1 in 4. Subsiding on 15 CDs again. They are not in that 1 in 4. But quite frankly, those numbers are small. Living in Ghana today, it's small. So I think and I really love what you guys are doing, talking about some of these issues. I know it's election season. I know that minds are already elsewhere.
Yeah.
But these are the bread and butter issues. These are the sort of things that people should be talking more about. And in fact, when election season rolls around, people should be asking their candidates these sorts of questions. So by the way, what are you going to be doing about poverty? By the way, we understand the numbers are improving, but it's still large. By the way, we understand inequality is increasing. What does that mean? We understand that inequality is not good for the general development of the country. What are you going to do about that? I think these are the sorts of things that need to become a lot more current in our discussion. There is a lot of power in numbers. I think it takes a critical mass to move something more easily. So the more we can garner that critical mass, the more likely that those who have to pay attention will pay attention. Those who have to do critical things, the policies, what is happening with the policy, who is implementing the policy, how is it being adjusted. If people can then be asked to account, they're more likely to be able to account if people actually care about these things. But if people don't discuss them, well, it just slips a little bit into the background. I don't know if you followed, I think it was last month, there was a Poverty and Inequality Forum that was hosted by NDPC. We supported that. And that was just looking at some of the latest data that exists with poverty and inequality. And it was a useful forum. It's just, bringing people together to say, by the way, this is Ghana. These are some of the things that are happening in Ghana. Are you aware of this? What are some of the policy choices that could be made around this? And they came out with some useful policy recommendations. Some of them are very familiar. For instance, focus on agriculture. We've heard that before. But why? Because if you manage to make a change in agriculture, you touch a lot of the lives of people who are actually poor. Some of it was improve the quality of services. So again, the suggestion is, we all know that money is an issue. So even without any new money, significant new money, can we just make that money that we're actually spending now work better?
But all these things you're saying, the leaders, they know about it.
But who is asking them about it? I mean, during this whole...
Well, what difference would it make? When we ask, would that actually lead to them doing something on the ground?
Of course, it does. Ghana is a democratic, is part of democratic system of governance, isn't it? People actually cast their vote for who is going to run the country.
And some critics have said that in Ghana, we don't particularly vote based on issues.
That's the problem. So if you were voting based on issues, if you were voting really looking at what the candidate that's going to come in going to do about making sure that your children and the children in your family have better opportunities, and beyond the children in your family, because you can't just focus on your family, you want to make sure that more or less the children in Ghana are doing well for the good of Ghana in future, and for your own children too in future, because inequalities are not good in the long term. If you're really probing candidates on that issue, they would have to come up with an answer, right? And it's on that answer that you can then ask them after they've come back and said, by the way, Mr. President, you promised us that you would do X, Y, and Z. What's going on with this issue? And that's how we make progress.
Let's talk about eradicating poverty. It's a nice dream, but can we seriously do that? We
have reduced poverty significantly from when we started counting deliberately in 1990. So if we have managed to reduce it significantly, we're not where we want to be, but we have reduced it. it means we can reduce it even further. And I believe we can eradicate it. In Ghana, for instance, which is a nice success story for Africa, at least as far as poverty is concerned, it went down from 1990, when we started looking at the MDGs. It was 56% or something like that. And now it's 24 point something percent. So more than half it's reduced. But we can still celebrate, as I mentioned earlier. More than 24% still means 1 in 4. And by the way, when we look at the numbers, 8 CDs a day really is not, that much to be really excited about. But we've managed to get it down. We can get it down further still. And there are many things we can do. Some of it is in this whole development business, and perhaps this is my view, but I think it's consistent with many views, is that we should deliberately look for what we are trying to find. So you need to know who the poor are. You need to know what your numbers are. You need to know where they are. And then you need to look at specific interventions that will actually touch them. And that we have not been very good at doing. We have done a lot of things that have touched a lot of people, but the people who tend to access services more easily are those with resources, no? So the poorest ones are not the ones that access those resources easily. So if you really want to target them, you actually have to go after them. And an interesting thing about the reducing poverty is that while the numbers have gone down the percentage has gone down so significantly, the numbers haven't gone down.
What does that mean?
Because the population has grown. So again, we have to know. Population, it's gone down, I think, by only 10%. Yeah, while the percentage
So then, can we
have
say
gone,
we're making progress?
No, we are making progress, but I think we need to look at this to say, okay, no, we still need to do a lot more, because the more people we have growing in poverty, and an interesting thing is that children are more likely to be poor also. Why? Because poor households tend to have more children in them than some of the richer households. And if you don't deliberately target those households where those children are, you don't give them a fair start in life. And if you don't give them a fair start in life, not only is it bad for the individual, right? The individual doesn't get all they need as the foundation to have access to take care of themselves and to be able to contribute more positively in society. But not only it's not good for them, I think what we have to think about is sort of the enlightened self-interest. It's not good for all of us. If you have a significant portion of the population that's not doing well, you who are doing well cannot really, sleep well at night. Period. And not only you lose the talents of what they could have added to that economy that we would have all benefited from. So yes, I think we're making progress, and it's global. We're making progress, but yes, we just need to do a lot more. Good things are happening, but more of it needs to happen.
Let's look specifically at UNICEF's intervention. In Ghana, some of us, it's refreshing when we hear other independent organizations stepping in to do something. When you leave all to government, it doesn't actually move on like the way you want it to. So how are you helping us solve this issue?
You mean you need people to be behind this? You need to galvanize citizens to be behind this. Well, UNICEF is, we're international civil service. That's something a lot of people don't realize. We're created by governments. So these same governments that get together to decide these goals are the same governments that in some different configuration got together and created the different agencies of the United Nations, of which UNICEF is one of them.
But they're surely not African governments.
Oh, African governments have a say. African governments are part of the United Nations system. When we are in Ghana, we
are they that
mandated.
Significant? Seriously?
They are significant. And they would be even more significant if they decided to be even more significant. But no, jokes aside, of course African governments are significant. I think we're as significant as, you want to be. I think the United Nations is international civil service. We exist to support the development aspirations of governments and peoples, right? So we work at the service of governments. Just like your national civil service, we're just the international version. So while we're in a country, of course, we exist to support that country in their development plans. We're supposed to be very independent, so we don't take orders, so to speak, but our job is to support. And Ghana has development plans. We buy into that development plan, so we don't come with our own development plan, so to speak. We look at Ghana's own development plan and see where we are value added, and we do work in that area. And in Ghana, we work in 5 different areas, but one of the most exciting areas is our social policy area, which a lot of our poverty and inequality work is done. And a lot of the work there is actually just data and analysis. You have fine institutions in Ghana. You have Ghana Statistical Service that does a great job. But we support some of that work just to get more, detailed data on children, what's happening with children. And I believe that's one of the key lessons that we should take. If you're going to improve something, you really need to know what it is, what it looks like.
But that's what we also mostly lack in Ghana.
Yes. So that's one of the key areas in which we work. And that's one of those key recommendations of, look, data systems just need to improve. Right now, we rely a lot on indicator data. So to tell whether or not we're making progress on any particular issue, development issue, we have to wait 3 to 5 years when we have demographic health survey results, large household data, or data sets like the Ghana Living Standard Survey. So it takes a while. Routine data systems, which are beginning to come up, I think everybody recognizes that we need good routine data systems. For instance, in health, we're talking about DIMS. In education, we're talking about EMIS, etc. They're not strong enough yet to be able to tell us at any one point exactly where we are. Yeah, and that we really need to strengthen. Another area we need to strengthen is civil registration and vital statistics.
Okay.
It's only what, 60-something% of children, less than 7 out of 10% of children are registered at birth. So, and the number of marriages that are registered and the number of deaths that are registered. So there's just a lot that we can't tell because we don't have the routine systems that, give us the data. And we tend to collect a lot of data, small data sets here and there, and a lot of it is hiding in people's drawers, not brought out in a manner which, we can all access them.
Yeah.
So that's a key area. Like at the individual level, if you want to improve something in your life, so at the national level, if you want to improve something, you really need to have the data that tells you what it is, how it looks like, where it is, and that so that you can look from time to time to say, okay, is this thing working or not working? What I'm doing, is it making sense or not?
So is this something that UNICEF is supporting us to?
Yes. Data is one of the key areas, and doing a lot of work in data. An interesting one that was done again on poverty was the fuel subsidy work that was done a few years ago. It was just doing the analysis. Government had decided to take away the fuel subsidy, which I think was a very good thing, quite frankly. I think many Ghanaians might not be happy hearing me say that. But
I think we've gotten over it now.
Excellent. Because it's one of those things that, sounds good, but again, who benefits? It's the top people who benefit. The bottom people who you actually want to be benefiting from this sort of thing really don't benefit from it. But when it was taken away, who would have suffered most? It's the bottom people. So again, the analytical work to be able to say, okay, do something, otherwise a number of people will drop into poverty almost immediately by taking away those subsidies, which were a good thing, by the way, to take away. But you could mitigate that. And part of that mitigation is the flagship social protection program, which is LEAP. So cash transfer, and LEAP actually targets really the poorest. So specifically, the money goes to the poorest.
Yeah, but I've also asked a question on LEAP. How sustainable is that? If you keep giving them the monies that you give them, how can they survive on their own someday?
The main intent of LEAP is not the adults in those households. Well, they benefit too, but the main intent of LEAP is to try and break this transmission of poverty from the adults of those poor households to the children of those poor households, right? Because with the cash grant itself, what all the evaluations are telling us is that the children in those households are more likely to get a better nutrition, are more likely, they're actually enrolled in national health insurance, are more likely to get health care, they're more likely to go and stay in school. And these are some of the
But do we know that for sure?
Yes. Yes, yes, I say that without a shadow of a doubt,
Okay.
yes. And perhaps at some future program, you should get the managers of the LEAP program and those who within the gender ministry to come and talk more about this program. I think it's extremely promising.
You know, sometimes we do, but it's good to hear, you know, an opinion from somebody like you who is not associated with any of these, you know, directly, if you like. So an objective opinion is more refreshing. Yeah.
It is working, and that's one of the things that's highlighted in the report as well, that cash transfer programs do work. They're not perfect, they're not a panacea, but they do work.
Do they actually go to people who are poor,
That
who
is
don't
the
belong
secret.
to any political side?
That is the secret. For them to really work, you need that mechanism that makes sure that it's actually going to the poor. And in Ghana, it is going to the poor. They did a study how many years ago now? I think it was before I arrived. I got in Ghana in 2013, so it was around 2012 or something, and looked at some national social protection programs and looked at, you know, which ones, you know, got to the poor most. You had National Health Insurance Service, you had the LEAP, and you had a number of others. But LEAP was shown, at that point, the system was still not as strong as it is now. It showed that it got those who were benefiting from the program, and we're talking about 4 years ago or something like that, about 7 out of 10 of those who were benefiting from the program were actually those who should have benefited from the program, if you see what I mean. For some of the other ones, it was a lot more mixed. For National Health Insurance, for instance, it targets a broad range of society, right? So we're not talking about the poorest. Whereas for LEAP at the time, we're talking about, okay, 7 out of 10 of those who are actually benefiting from are among the poorest. And since then, the system has been strengthened.
Okay.
So that is the secret. You have to make sure that, well, you're actually targeting the poorest of the poor. And again, that's where people just need to be talking more about this. The skepticism is normal, is expected. Especially if you feel like you need support too. Imagine if you're the one getting 15 CDs a day. 15 CDs a day is still not that much money. You feel like you need support, but you know that somebody else who is getting, you know, less than 8 a day is getting support. You have a right to say, but why them and not me, right? But with more discussion, bringing people around the table, getting the experts, getting the ordinary, with more discussion, we can unpack some of these things. But from what I know, from the studies that have been done, it is actually targeting the poorest of the poor. But the challenge there is it's not targeting enough of the poorest of the poor. LEAP now is reaching, I think at the beginning of this year, it was reaching about 47,000 households, which is an improvement from where it used to be. I mean, 3 years ago, the numbers it was less than half of that number. But we're talking about the poorest of the poor, about 2.2 million people. Those are the poorest of the poor, really, 2.2 million. About 7 point something million just ordinary poor. So it's not targeting enough. So it's making some changes in individuals' lives. It's making some changes in some small communities, but it's not making that big societal massive change that we need to see.
You know, we have just a couple of months to go for the general elections.
Yes.
And by now, a lot of us expecting the political parties to be out with their manifestos. That's also, it gives us a major, highlight some of the things that they want to do. And it comes as a major talking points for a lot of the shows. But now there's nothing out really, so you can hold them to anything. Should we be expecting them to be talking about poverty? Usually it's a lot of infrastructure, more of political stuff. but should we expect some of these key issues, poverty, inequality?
Definitely. If they're not talking about poverty, they should be asked why they're not talking about poverty, why poverty is not an issue for them. There are many, I mean, for society to grow and develop, etc., there are many different aspects that need to be looked at, right? But I think poverty is definitely one of the key ones that touches all of us. We want to improve. We want to do better. I think in that discussion, you cannot ignore poverty. You need to talk about growth. How are we going to grow? What are you going to do with the economy to make sure that we're growing? But that's part of that poverty equation, right? What are you going to do to reduce the poverty? And yes, I think we should definitely be expecting them to talk about it. Some of the major policy recommendations that came out of this in Poverty and Inequality Conference that was done with NDPC not too long ago. Agriculture came out, social protection came out, skills and development came out. Those are the three big ones that I remember. I would say that those three things you want to be seen somewhere. What the new government, the government that aspires to be in charge, well, what are they going to do about these things that impact on the well-being of Ghanaians?
All right, we wait to see what they come out with. And what Ghanaians, what we also ask, you know. Around this time, a lot of the political parties, again, are also going round. Is it that sometimes the poor forgets that they are poor because you see them happily following the politicians and not asking the key questions that you say we should be asking? Meanwhile, they are poor.
I don't know how to answer that question, sadly, because I face the same issue in my own country. I think sometimes in a system, we feel like we don't trust the system 100%, right?
We don't.
That we will
That's
be
a
able
fact.
to navigate our way through, and that it's based on merit and things like, we don't trust it. So if you don't trust the system 100%, then you try to sort of align yourself to who you think might be able to perhaps give some favors in time of need. Perhaps it's a very crude way of talking about a patronage system, but perhaps that's what's at bay. And I think the media and shows like this should help just sort of open people's mind, those minds that need to be opened, to say, actually, no, there are some bigger issues. Let's make sure that we ask the questions of the bigger issues. Again, as I said earlier, we can't have change without critical mass, but it's so much easier to have change with critical mass. You need people, you need that energy of people asking for something, for that something to more easily actualize. Yeah, you need people asking. So all of us should be asking.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Finally, before we wrap up on this conversation, what are some of the key things that you'll be looking out for Ghana, for us to be doing within what time frame?
I think for Ghana, it's what time frame? Well, everybody's time frame now is 2030. But I think what I would love to see is, okay, progress is being made, but are we really pushing the envelope? Yeah. So, for instance, on poverty and inequality, do we have specific plans in place? Are we really looking at children? Because if you're going to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty, you really need to focus on children. So are we really looking at children? Are we growing those interventions that we know work? For instance, the cash transfer program, but even more broadly, social protection, the social protection agenda. Are we growing that to make sure that, you know, we're getting better? And then using money better. So the services now that are in place, the quality, quite frankly, is poor in some cases. What are we doing to make the quality of those services better? Education is a classic one. You know that the majority of children who are in grade 3, if I'm not mistaken, actually can't read or write. And that's reflective of a bigger problem. You know, many children go through school, yeah, but school somehow doesn't go through them. They come out not knowing what they're supposed to have learned. And whose fault is that? We actually got them into this school, right? Parents sent them into this school. There are actually some teachers. We have teachers. Then why are the children not learning? So services need to improve. Health services, for instance, and a lot of work is being done to improve them. But what can we do to further improve those services? So that's what I'm looking out for. Yes, we're making progress, but are we really pushing the boundaries to make progress to the extent that we could make that progress? And we count on the population. We need people to be asking the questions, to be making the noise, to be demanding and expecting. That's how change is made.
I'm grateful for your time this morning. Miss Suzanne Namando Ngonge is representative UNICEF Ghana, and you've been following through our conversation. So let's make things happen. Let's keep asking all the very simple questions. They are not difficult questions. They are the everyday question. But somehow, when the politics is heated, we seem to forget the things that we should truly be asking. So I hope that this helps all of us to come back to the things that we should be asking. Thank you so much for your time. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Stay with us. This is still the AM show. Roland Walker is up next with AM Talk with his guests.